Welcome to episode 3 of Peacock Cinema Podcasts, your behind-the-scenes ticket to Peacock Cinema, a brand new community cinema in Dunfermline, Scotland's ancient capital. This podcast is in partnership with On Fife and the Dunfermline Regeneration Trust. In today's episode, episode 3, we'll discuss the animated films screened across our kids' film strand, but we'll pay most attention to Bristol-based animation studio Aardman's 2012 film Pirates in an adventure with scientists and uncover a little bit more about the film. At the Peacock Cinema at Carnegie Hall, we'll be screening this film by Aardman on Sunday the 17th of August 2025. I'm Dr Jamie Steele, one of the team at Peacock Cinema and lecturer in film and screen studies at Bath University. And today, we're joined by Dr Zlatina Nikolova, lecturer in film studies at the University of Exeter. Welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here and to contribute to this initiative.
Thanks very much. So just to start off with, I thought we'll be having a bit of a conversation for part one on kind of animation more broadly, which we kind of tend to associate with kids' films. And in terms of our program, the animated films are primarily in part of that kind of strand. However, there are kind of more kind of academic approaches that we could adopt to animation more broadly. So do you mind giving us a bit of an overview of the different types of animation in the film kind of industry, and also how different Aardman's kind of approach to animation is in mainstream cinema?
So this is perhaps a kind of it's a question of two parts, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So first, when we talk about animation, there is this flourishing body of scholarly and critical work, animation studies that deals with the kind of the genre of animation, if you will, the craft of animation, the different technologies that it embodies and illustrates, the different applications of animation. So in a way, it's very difficult to define what animation is because it is all of these things and none of them individually. I think it's important to remember, especially when we think about animation within the popular psyche and popular discourse, we tend to associate it with a family-friendly narrative and aesthetic. But animation has a much longer history that almost kind of predates feature-length narrative film down to, avant-garde artists of the early turn of the 20th century, who kind of begin to experiment not just with visual representation and visual form, but also what that visual representation might be able to achieve in conjunction with different technology. So we have, people like Vasily Kandinsky and Viking Egeling, all of these sort of avant-gardists experimenting with visual form, music, rhythm. And actually, there are some really kind of interesting examples that have translated from that into popular kind of Disney experimentation, if you think about the Fantasia films. And then later on, obviously, animation becomes this part of the film industry. It's almost like a genre with a target audience, set aesthetic. But it's actually, it's really much more than that. It's, as I said, a whole set of technologies, a practice in its own kind, and also a tool to enhance TV, to enhance film. And in many ways, the selection that you have here of films exemplifies that, because you have Pixar, which is Ratatouille, this kind of beautiful CG animation, Pirates by Aardman, which is the stop motion claymation practice and craft. And also Where the Wild Things Are, which basically uses animation as simply as a tool, as a special effect in post-production to animate characters. So that really demonstrates the scope and the possibility of animation. And, it's not really limited to kids' films or family entertainment.
No, you just have to look at Mubi, for instance. They've got like a whole animation strand that are kind of engaging with a range of different kind of thought-provoking kind of themes, kind of articulating key parts of like feminist theory, for example, using it as a kind of tool for political kind of engagement as well. We see that even with kind of Ari Feldman's Waltz with Bashir as well, from the kind of mid 2000s. So it's kind of something that is quite a flexible form of film.
Mm-hmm. And, animation is perhaps because it is semi-abstract and illusory and this kind of magical product that comes out of, creativity and effort and technology. It is able to articulate really, really complex narratives in a really friendly, accessible way. If you think about socio-political issues, feminist discourse, environment, all of that, we can find kind of different examples of animation doing that and communicating those important narratives in an accessible way that still challenges on an ideological level, but it doesn't affront almost.
Excellent. And some of the kind of films that we've selected as part of the kind of program on Peacock Cinema, as you say, use animation in different ways, particularly kind of thinking about kind of Pixar and Ratatouille. And then we have, Aardman with the pirates, and later the CGI, as you mentioned, with where the wild things are. I'd like to kind of talk a little bit more about kind of Aardman in particular, a bit of a kind of background, and thinking about kind of what makes an Aardman film. What's its kind of brand? What makes it kind of so distinctive? Why are people kind of drawn to their films, would you say?
Well, very briefly, kind of Aardman is Bristol-based, kind of initially small studio, founded by Davis Proxton and Peter Lord, and then obviously later on they're joined by this amazing sort of team of people, most notably Nick Park with Wallace and Gromit.
Mm-hmm.
And they're known for, I think, a whole range of both crafts and kind of elements of their practice, but also characters and type of narrative and type of humor that are kind of invested in their identity and their creative output. They work in stop motion and claymation. And for those who aren't entirely sure what stop motion is or stop frame animation, this is basically a animation and special effects technique where physical objects or physical models are manipulated in tiny, tiny increments in between shots, which are photographed individually in order to create that kind of illusion of independent, continuous motion. It's very kind of a long process. It's painstaking, but realistically, anything in animation is laborious. Animation is a laborious practice in its own right, but claymation and stop motion are these really kind of detail-oriented techniques. And with Aardman, obviously they're known for a range of characters: Morph, Wallace and Gromit, Shaun the Sheep, like all of these characters. They're known for a specific type of very British kind of humor that takes what one might call ordinary characters, maybe except for pirates, but ordinary characters, and kind of finding the humor and the humanity in those situations that I think makes them their output really, really creative and valuable and emblematic of their identity. And the other thing that I always consider an incredible achievement with Aardman, and that's really on show in Pirates, is the level of attention to detail in everything from the character design to the environment and the sets that they're able to construct for their characters.
Yeah, I mean, with Aardman, there's something that's really quite kind of painstaking in terms of their approach to animation in particular. It's all the kind of small details and all those small increments in terms of making these films and, as you say, kind of crafting these kind of characters. Whenever I kind of teach a little bit of animation, which I do in a very cursory way, I think for 1 week, and I should be doing more of it. I'm very much aware of that because I'm kind of like sketching over a lot of different kind of important nuances, important kind of aspects. And that's what we kind of get with Aardman Studios. And as you kind of say, the characters are quite iconic for British TV and British kind of film, from Wallace and Gromit. And as Benna Hollis Rowe kind of outlines in her book on Aardman, that there's a kind of certain northernness to Wallace and Gromit that's quite kind of distinctive. There's the accents are really quite crucial, and maybe when we talk a bit more about the pirates a bit later, there's those kind of play with the different accents in the film as well, and the range of different kind of stars, I suppose, that add to that kind of complexity. And what we associate with Aardman is that kind of focus on claymation in particular, and that's been something that's been part of their works from Wallace and Gromit, Chicken Run in 2000, 25 years. I think it's been 25 years since Chicken Run. That makes you feel old, doesn't it? Shaun the Sheep, Early Man, and the Pirates as well. And I think there are certain kind of sequences in the Pirates where they use CGI kind of briefly. And also they kind of deviated from this model with Arthur Christmas, which was seen as a commercial failure for Aardman as well, when they kind of focused mainly on CGI and went away from their traditional kind of approach using claymation. One thing that we've kind of talked a little bit about is that we kind of think about animation as being kind of kid-friendly. There are these kind of important kind of parts to the history of animation. It can be kind of provocative, it can be kind of playful, and also it can be family friendly. And it's something that should be more of an object of critical kind of analysis and critical valorization. Do you think that this is the case for some of the films that we've got on the program, maybe in the Pirates in particular, where these films need to be taken seriously?
Yes, I think they do. They need to be taken seriously. And I think with Aardman especially, there are a lot of reasons for Aardman as a studio and as a creative output to be taken seriously, in part because of their kind of cultural contribution through the kind of devising these really emblematic characters and telling these narratives with humor and humanity, as I was saying, but also in terms of their ability to preserve a certain type of craft within animation and to develop it and to make it prominent globally and award-winning globally, and also to promote a certain type of sort of, as you were saying, kind of national identity almost within their films. Yes, Pirates is a bit more glamorous. They have quite a lot of star power in the voice cast. Hugh Grant, Martin Freeman, David Tennant, Salma Hayek voices Cutlass Liz, Jeremy Piven. So there's a lot of kind of star power behind those characters. But if you look at Pirates specifically, it, unlike maybe Arthur Christmas, less so in Flushed Away, but perhaps if you compare Pirates and Arthur Christmas, Pirates retains a lot of the style and the aesthetic of Aardman, especially in the depiction of kind of speech. There is a very specific way that Aardman characters say certain sounds and behave and move that is perhaps less obvious in something like Arthur Christmas. And I think if you slightly moved away from this notion that animation or Pirates, family-oriented or kids' films, Pirates is actually a book adaptation. I think if we moved away from that notion and you see it as a creative output, as a cultural output, as value added to the creative industry in the UK, then definitely it's not just a kids' film. It's a massive contribution, I think.
I suppose we can unpack a little bit later on and have a bit more of a discussion about how there's kind of, it's appealing to two different audiences. When you're watching the film, yes, you've got the kids who are kind of captivated by the characters, but then you've got those little subtle jokes and in-jokes as well that are for adults as well. And also we can appreciate the creative labor, as you say. We can appreciate the level of technical ability to be able to kind of put these quite masterful films together. So within the kind of films as part of our program, so thinking about kind of Pixar's Ratatouille, the Pirates, and maybe more kind of the Pirates and Where the World Things Are, we can think about how film has that kind of intimate engagement with us as audience members. It's kind of a bit of an experience. And when I kind of watch these kind of films, they seem to have a tactile kind of quality. To what extent do you think that that's the case within films like The Pirates and Where the Wild Things Are?
So questions of tactility and the questions of the sensorial are really interesting within animation studies, because tactility in many ways is a challenge for animation because it's not there. Nothing, that we see on screen is just kind of naturally there. It has to be brought there. And with CGI especially, we see this incredible technological jump in the development of fur, lighting, a movement, certain materials. And in Ratatouille, that's really quite starkly exemplified because the main character is this rat. So he's fuzzy, he's furry, and he needs to move in with quite a lot of fluidity that appears natural. At the same time, again, in the film, there is this sense of the sensorial and the affective because the film is about food. So there are little sequences where we see Remy, the main character, immerse himself in the kind of the sensations of different types of food, and he talks about combining them, and his own sensorial kind of impression is visualized on screen for us. And of course, there are this kind of fantastic physical comedy in Ratatouille, because it's basically a rat animating a human. So that's like a whole different level of animation that goes on in Ratatouille. I think with Aardman and their output, and Pirates specifically, the question of tactility is effectively embodied by the fact that these are models, they actually exist and they're being manipulated in between shots. So with Aardman, very frequently we can see thumbprints and we can see like different elements of movement. And then with The Wild Things Are, again, The Wild Things Are is quite interesting in its combination of people in suits, animatronic, voice acting, and animation in post-production in order to animate the characters. So I think animation touches its viewer on multiple levels, intellectual level, obviously through narrative and character connection, but also through its ability to emulate three-dimensionality, which is what happens in Ratatouille and Pirates, just through different technique and technologies. And also kind of that broader discussion of experiencing a film with an audience together. Watching a film in an audience in a cinema is its own affective moment that doesn't repeat once the audience changes and the space changes. So watching Pirates at home and watching Pirates in the cinema is completely different.
I always say that whenever, and I'm sure it's the case for you, whenever you're talking to your students as well, like when they're watching the films that are kind of our main topics for each week, they watch them on their phones perhaps, or on their laptops with the kind of headphones. And that's a very different kind of experience to how we kind of engage with them in the cinema itself. And that's kind of one of the things that we've been kind of championing when I've been giving my kind of short talks and having chats with people kind of after the film screenings, is that our kind of cinema, the Peacock Cinema, is for the community. It's kind of run by the community, and it's about kind of bringing people together. One of the main kind of parts we talked about on episode 1 was how we can use cinema as a way of kind of tackling isolation. And that's one of the key kind of tenets with it, was kind of bringing people together so they're not just kind of at home and forming those kind of bonds. And as you say, when we watch these kind of films, particularly something like The Pirates, let's say, or even Ratatouille, you'll have that different kind of experience when you're like laughing in the humorous kind of sections, because someone else might set you off and they'll make it like even funnier and funnier. And even when we're kind of thinking something Where the Wild Things Are, it's again about the emotions that the film can provoke within us. And a film like that is about kind of very deeply kind of affecting us as individuals by provoking those kind of more sensitive kind of emotions as well. And the cinema can be intimate in those kind of films, but also it can be somewhere where we can kind of express our own kind of emotions. And humor is one kind of way of doing it. And I think those kind of films, Ratatouille and The Pirates, do that really nicely. So in part 2, I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into the film that we're screening on Sunday, the 17th of August, which is The Pirates, an adventure with scientists, which is the UK name for the film. So the film is directed by Peter Lord, based on Gideon Defoe's children's book of the same name, published in 2004. And the screenplay was written by the author Gideon Defoe as well. The film is a co-production between Aardman and Sony Pictures and was nominated for the Best Animated Feature Film at the 2013 Academy Awards. So the film is kind of, as we kind of discussed a little bit earlier on, Aardman is known for its kind of distinctive style, known for its kind of claymation, and known for its kind of sense of Britishness. What were some of the key kind of sequences for you, Zlatina, within the film? What kind of really stood out to you? I know you talked a little bit about these little elements of humour within it to start with.
I really love the little humorous bits that are quintessentially kind of Aardman and quintessentially British, because I think they add to the characterization. I quite like the character of the captain himself. So he perceives himself as quite glamorous and ambitious, and he is to an extent, but also if he fails in his mission to become the greatest pirate captain, he resorts to making children's clothes. So just kind of the, babies' clothes, because they grow so fast. But it just kind of the bizarre juxtaposition of a pirate captain hoping to become, the best pirate captain ever. And the second option of, the second career option that he chooses are just kind of quite bizarre in juxtaposition. And also I do quite kind of enjoy, again, the bizarre interpretation of certain characters. Darwin himself, he's basically a nerd who really wants to impress the girl he likes by abducting a Polly the dodo, who then becomes this kind of prized hen. Which is not really a hen, but it's actually a dodo, a very rare species, an endangered species. And I think the representation of these kind of bizarre moments and interesting characters in slightly matter-of-fact style is really what makes the narrative for me. Another fantastic sequence is when towards the end, Queen Victoria kind of sheds her dress and then sheds the robot contraption that's under the dress in order to become this kind of almost fighter type ninja. These kind of moments are fantastic, I think, and they not only add to the character and the humor, but also create a very specific type of narrative that takes a lot of perhaps what would have been character stereotypes and historical stereotypes into a completely different direction that's completely unexpected.
It's kind of usurping or kind of undermining our kind of expectations within the film. And as you kind of say, it's kind of playing on our kind of what we've learned at school in particular about these kind of key historical kind of figures. And as you describe it, sounds entirely logical, doesn't it, within the film? It's something that is completely ridiculous, but then within kind of Aardman's film, it feels kind of semi-plausible in a way. So it's kind of defying our expectations to kind of create this sense of humor within the film. Yeah, so for me, I kind of really kind of hit home a little bit when seeing some of those jokes for adults. So going into baby clothes and growing so fast, and you're thinking, oh goodness, yes, it's definitely a moneymaker for somebody, kind of baby's clothes. And then just shortly after, they kind of described the Pirate of the Year award as commercial, and I think both of those kind of aspects neatly kind of allied in my mind to kind of think about, oh yeah, it's about this kind of commercialization of these kind of notions that are very much the antithesis of this. They're quite anarchic in terms of being pirates, but then on the other hand, they're being kind of commercialized at the same time. And there was one sequence that I thought was very much kind of tied into my childhood, where you kind of, when you're watching it, and it's one of those subtleties that I'm sure everyone will notice, is that when they're on their way back to the UK, they make sure they stop off in Calais to pick up the duty free. There's kind of this very much a kind of stereotype from the 80s, 90s of the UK, kind of hopping over to Calais. And there's those little subtleties that for a kids audience, they'll like enjoy the journey, and then for the kind of adults maybe from that who grew up in that period and that time, they would like immediately know exactly what that means. And I think the film does that kind of so beautifully in a way. So the humor is very much there. It's very much kind of quintessentially Aardman, and Christopher Mayer in the Bella Honus Rose kind of publication on Aardman describes it as a idiosyncratic humor. There's something that's definitely distinctively kind of connected to Aardman. So thinking about we talked a little bit earlier about the different styles of animation, and the Pirates kind of blends different types of animation. It's primarily claymation that we associate with Aardman, and there are some little sequences that are CGI or computer generated within the film, particularly kind of the sea footage. Yeah. So what are some of the kind of differences in the techniques there that within the film, and what does that kind of bring to the film, would you say?
Well, I think technology is in general a theme that we see across a lot of Aardman films. And I think in Pirates, you kind of see the juxtaposition between CGI animation for certain elements of the mise-en-scène of the world of the narrative, and in conjunction with claymation. And in a way, it's, I think, an instance of experimentation and an instance of creative and technical ambition to combine those different technologies. And it's actually a really excellent example of how you combine different types of animation in order to create this highly detailed narrative full of humor and entertaining characters. So it's a bit of experimentation, a bit of creative endeavor, a bit of creative achievement.
That gives it that kind of level of plausibility for us as an audience. It's tying together these different techniques to make it feel more approachable and plausible for us as an audience. So in part 3, I wanted to have a bit of a brief discussion about how animation as a mode of industrial practice can engage with kind of contemporary issues, debates, and contemporary challenges that we are kind of facing in the real world. So kind of seen a few clips and read a little bit about current films like Claude Barris's Savages, for example, which is kind of engaging with important issues such as deforestation. Also, kind of from my own research, looking back over time to the early 2010s, there's films like Sammy's Adventures, which is tackling kind of a climate crisis and environmental concerns. So animation can have this kind of important aspect to it in terms of communicating these challenges to a wide audience. Do you mind kind of giving me a bit of an insight into some other kind of examples that we may want to go and watch kind of afterwards that takes animation seriously, that engage with these important kind of topics?
Well, the first thing I would say is that animation in many ways is the perfect kind of medium to engage with difficult questions, because as I was saying earlier, it can represent really challenging social, political, ideological issues in a friendly, approachable, non-confrontational style. And examples that immediately come to mind would be WALL-E, Finding Nemo, and Finding Dory. And most recently, Flow. Flow is amazing. And actually, in many ways, I think Flow also illustrates one of the difficulties in classifying what animation is, because Flow was developed in a game engine, as opposed to in a traditional CGI or cell or stop motion kind of technique. So it really illustrates the connection between the tradition of animation and technology. And this kind of technological evolution is why it's difficult to classify what animation is. But as I said, there's multiple examples of animation raising issues that really need addressing. And I think, in a way, because of the effective quality of animation and the way it builds a connection that's intellectual, sensorial, and emotional between its characters and its worlds and the individual viewer, I think this is what makes it such an effective mode of communicating important issues. Everybody feels for the cat in Flow. Everybody loves WALL-E.
So yeah, I mean, so it has this kind of important kind of aspect to it, and as an audience, we can really kind of empathize with those characters or sympathize with them engenders these kind of emotions with us and it makes us want to kind of do something about it really as well.
Yeah.
So plenty to watch for us kind of after our kind of film screenings and part of our kind of film program at Peacock Cinema. So thank you to Zlatina for her contributions today and giving us a real kind of insight into the kind of animation industry. We'll be screening Pirates in an Adventure with Scientists at the Peacock Cinema on Sunday, the 17th of August, 2025. I'll see you then.